The October 7th terrorist attack by Hamas was barbaric and horrifying. Civilians were targeted, tortured, raped, murdered, and kidnapped. Approximately 240 people are being held hostage in Gaza right now. They range in age from 9 months to 85 years old and come from over 33 countries, including the United States. The families of these hostages are living in anguish, hoping and praying their loved ones are alive and will come home. We stand with these families and Israel. We affirm Israel's right to fully defend itself against terrorists. While we stand with the Jewish people, what makes this moment worse is that many have responded by blaming Israel. Unfortunately, the hateful beliefs behind the attack are not isolated to the Middle East. This committee has jurisdiction over the tax code and must address two related issues that have been laid bare in the aftermath of October 7th. First, tax-exempt charities operating in the United States are providing support, encouragement, and potential financing to Hamas and Hamas-affiliated groups. This concern is not theoretical. In the early 2000s, the U.S. government identified and shut down the Holy Land Foundation in the United States. That foundation funneled $12.4 million from Americans to Hamas. Shockingly, a 501c3 entity called American Muslims for Palestine and its related C4 have been sued in federal court for operating as an alter ego of the Holy Land Foundation. The two groups have many of the same leaders and may be continuing the same efforts to support Hamas. Second, the eruption of hatred towards Jewish students on college campuses after the October 7th attack has been disturbing to watch. But the organization around it is not some organic movement. It has been carefully built over years, in part by American Muslims for Palestine. They helped build, shape, and train a group called Students for Justice in Palestine, or SJP. Many SJP events have involved pro-Hamas slogans and have led to intimidation, harassment, and violence against Jewish students. Unfortunately, an absence of leadership on college campuses has allowed hostility toward Jewish students to escalate since October 7th. And too many university presidents have sought to placate the most radical voices on their campuses. University presidents were quick and forceful in issuing statements supporting numerous social justice matters. They haven't shied away from commenting on other events affecting their students. But when it comes to the bloodiest day for Jews since the Holocaust, they couldn't find their voices. Cornell's president had to clarify her initial vague statement to let people know she does think Hamas's attack was terrorism. Harvard's president waited days to comment, allowing student groups condemning Israel to implicitly speak for the university. At the same time, we have seen pro-Palestinian protest become means of intimidation and threats of violence. When they fail to act, universities claim it's about free speech rights. But that is laughable. These universities have a track record of failing to protect free speech rights, while instead protecting preferred speech. In fact, colleges are actively suppressing speech protected by the First Amendment. For example, the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, or FIRE, rates universities on their commitment to free speech on campuses. The University of Pennsylvania's latest rating is, quote, very poor. This is likely due to multiple instances of professors being investigated and disciplined for expressing various opinions relating to race and gender. Universities can and should protect free speech rights on campus for all voices, not just the ones that they prefer. This shouldn't be hard. Good people around the world have the moral clarity to call out evil as evil, terrorism as terrorism. We should have that same moral clarity as we proceed today. I'm pleased to recognize the ranking member, Mr. Neal, for his opening statement.
Thank you for calling this hearing, Mr. Chairman, and let there be no doubt that I, along with our colleagues on the Democratic side as well, we are here today to condemn anti-Semitism in all its forms, including the brutal attack that was launched by the terrorist organization Hamas on Israel on October 7th. The last month has been heartbreaking. To all those who are affected by the ongoing war, to the students who are afraid, and to all those whose hearts are broken watching the devastation unfold, please know we are with you. Over a month ago, Hamas unleashed evil, slaughtering 1,200 people and kidnapping hundreds, including Americans. This horrific event was the largest loss of Jewish life in a single day since the Holocaust. Meanwhile, there's been a sharp tick in anti-Semitism. These are not isolated incidents any longer. They are taking place on campuses across the country and communities as well, and bringing back the pain and fear that Jewish people know all too well, and they should not have to endure. Our first priority must always be safety. Universities also have responsibility to cultivate safe and supportive learning environments. Anti-Semitism is not innate, it's learned. As members of Congress, we must lead by example, requiring us not only to reject but to condemn hate outright in all forms. Racism, misogyny, xenophobia, Islamophobia, they have no place here and no place on our college campuses. We know that those who spew hatred toward one group also target others. Combating anti-Semitism on campuses not only gives Jewish students the dignity, respect, and safety they deserve, but also builds on our broader efforts to counter bigotry and hate. Hate is an epidemic, and it must be combated comprehensively. Recently, we've seen bombings on HBCU campuses, Asian students targeted in the wake of the pandemic, and rampant examples of white supremacy, all instances of hate-fueled discrimination, and we cannot be silent. The Biden administration has been dogged, launching new efforts to combat anti-Semitism on campuses back in May and deepening that work over the last month. The administration has quickly laid out a national security supplemental funding package to not only bolster the fight against Hamas terrorism, but also to deliver much-needed humanitarian aid for innocent people. There is bipartisan support for this funding, and the time is now to act. The Department of Justice and Homeland Security are leading efforts to strengthen coordination between campus law enforcement, state and local law enforcement as well, to keep these students safe, while also providing cybersecurity experts to support universities in assessing online risks. The Department of Education has taken several steps to address prohibited forms of anti-Semitic discrimination under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This afternoon, there is an opportunity to listen, and I'm grateful to our witnesses for taking the time to share their experiences and to let us know how Congress can best support you. Your appearance today is a profound act of courage and serves as a powerful reminder that we must always put people and free speech first. Fighting anti-Semitism and all the hate must not be a dividing issue, but denouncing bigotry is an American value and one that we all must carry forward from this day into the future. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Ranking Member Neal. I'm pleased to see such a large audience for our hearing today. As a reminder, the chairman is responsible under the rules of the House and the rules of the committee to maintain order and preserve decorum in the committee room. And members of the audience are reminded that they must behave in an orderly fashion. I will now introduce our witnesses. Ms. Talee Dror is a student at Cornell University and Vice President of Finance for Cornellians for Israel. Adam Lehman is President and CEO of Hillel International. Jonathan Schanzer is Senior Vice President of Research for the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. And Noah Tishby is a best-selling author and Israel's former special envoy for combating anti-Semitism. Jonathan Greenblatt is CEO and National Director of the Anti-Defamation League. Thank you all for joining us today. Your written statements will be made part of the hearing record, and you each have 5 minutes to deliver remarks. Mr. R., you may begin when you're ready.
Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Neal, and members of the Ways and Means Committee, thank you for the invitation to testify today. My name is Talia Dror. I'm a student at Cornell studying industrial and labor relations with minors in business and legal policy. But beyond that, I am the embodiment of the American dream. I'm the child of an immigrant who fled Iran after facing religious persecution, dreaming of an America where she could openly raise a Jewish family. I grew up hearing the cautionary tales of blatant anti-Semitism. How my grandfather was stabbed for being a Jew, how my mother was called a dirty Jew on a daily basis, how my family had to pretend they weren't Jewish. But I never thought the horrific anti-Semitism they faced would follow us to the country we fled to for refuge. 39 days ago, as I witnessed the mass rape, mutilation, and massacre committed by Hamas, my reality as a college student in the United States radically transformed. Students, professors, and administrators at Cornell celebrated the massacre of innocent civilians. Just 5 days after the heinous terror attacks, the Student Assembly introduced a resolution calling Hamas, quote, an armed resistance and placing full blame for the October 7th attacks on Israel. At the hearing, I spoke about the fact that the very terrorists endorsed by that resolution called for a global day of rage the next day. I explained that as a Jewish student leader, my community is terrified to walk around the school they pay to attend because they are afraid of getting threatened, assaulted, or killed. Students at rallies chant genocidal phrases like "from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." This is a chant that calls for the elimination of the state of Israel and all 7 million Jews inside of it. This is a chant that calls for a second Holocaust. Students scream Intifada revolution, calling for deadly terror attacks on civilians. A Cornell professor announced that he was exhilarated and energized by the Hamas attacks, by the murder of my family and friends. On October 25th, Cornell students woke up to a campus vandalized with graffiti that said Zionism equals genocide and new Intifada. That day, students walking into their classes stepped over calls for terror attacks and accusations of being genocidal for supporting the existence of the state of Israel. Cornell's administration has made firm statements on everything from Supreme Court cases to the war in Ukraine to Black Lives Matter. But in the wake of the deadliest day in Jewish history since the Holocaust, administrators have excused endorsements of terrorism under the guise of free speech. In their initial statement, they compared, quote, the loss of life in the Middle East to deaths caused by natural disasters. They allowed tensions to fester on campus, professors to use captive audiences to preach terrorist sympathies, and the targeting of Jewish students on their campus. They paved the perfect path for radicalized individuals to shift calls for the murder of Jews in Israel to calls for the extermination of Jews on campus. On the morning of October 29th, the provost, in an address to concerned Jewish parents, explained that while he understands concerns for their children's physical safety, that they shouldn't be worried. Not 7 hours later, Jewish students on campus received threats that said, quote, if I see another Jew on campus, I will stab you and slit your throat. If I see another pig female Jew, I will drag you away, rape you, and throw you off a cliff. Jews are human animal and deserve pigs' death. Liberation by any means, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Quote, Gonna shoot up 104 West, the kosher dining hall? Glory to Hamas, liberation by any means necessary. That night, I sat in my locked house, pondering my mortality. I knew that with my roommates and I being openly Jewish community leaders, our apartment would be one of the first targets for someone looking to actualize the threats. I thought back to the stories my mother told me growing up. How as a young child, I found so much comfort in having the privilege of being protected by a country built on the foundation of equal opportunity and individual liberty. 2 days later, I got news that the threats were made by a fellow student. This wasn't far away. It was at the same school I worked my whole life to get into. The school I invested my family's hard-earned life savings to attend. The school that promised me they would uphold a community of belonging. Universities have failed to uphold their self-proclaimed values of equity and belonging when it comes to Jewish students. The hypocrisy is glaring. In light of horrific anti-Semitism, Jewish students on campus have been courageous and resilient, but we shouldn't need to be. American Jewish students on campus deserve better. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you for your brave testimony. Mr. Lehman, you can now proceed.
Thank you, Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Neal, and distinguished members of the House Ways and Means Committee. I am here today on behalf of Hill International, the largest Jewish student organization in the world with a presence on more than 700 campuses in the United States. Our top priority in this fraught moment is addressing the frightening rise of anti-Semitism on college campuses, really telling the story you just heard from Talia that is playing out across the country. Even before October 7th, discrimination directed at Jewish students had been rising at a very concerning rate. However, since October 7th, we have seen an unprecedented spike in harassment, intimidation, hate, and even violence directed at Jewish students. In the past 5 weeks, our Hillels have reported 398 anti-Semitic incidents, a figure that includes 28 physical assaults. This level of anti-Semitic activity represents more than a 700% increase, again, 700% increase from the record level a year before in the same period. In addition to the harrowing threats and issues that Talia just described at Cornell, at other campuses, Jewish students, campuses from some of your own states, have been spit on. They have been beaten with a Palestinian flagpole. They have been physically assaulted for the crime of putting up a poster remembering Israeli hostages. They have been threatened by faculty members and subjected to an overwhelming onslaught of hate speech and intimidation. While some of this hate speech is encoded within chants demonizing Israel and seeking its destruction that we have all become far too immune to, Jewish students have also faced calls to gas the Jews, kill the Jews, and that Jews are Nazis. Let me be perfectly clear. We have no desire, as you all shared, to see anyone's free speech rights curtailed or their academic freedom compromised. There should be space on campus to debate about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and other geopolitical issues, including space for those advocating on behalf of both Israelis and Palestinians. But neither free speech nor academic freedom is a free pass for the targeted harassment, threats, discrimination, and violence being directed at Jewish and Israeli students. Hillels across the country are doing all we can to provide additional security, further community spaces, wellness and mental health support, and advocacy on behalf of our students. And Jewish student leaders like Talia are displaying courage and resilience in representing their communities and in continuing to work to promote understanding and partnership with other communities across campus. But Hillel professionals, Chabad professionals, and student leaders cannot solve this problem alone. They need and they deserve the same attention and action from their universities that we would want for any students facing this level of harassment and discrimination. Specifically, we're calling on university leaders to act firmly and swiftly in disciplining students, faculty, staff, and student groups like Students for Justice in Palestine that are clearly violating university policies and in many cases violating the law. We're calling on them to ensure that their DEI departments address issues of anti-Semitism with the same focus and force that they do for other forms of discrimination, to regulate and rein in protest activities that are frequently spawning grounds for harassment, intimidation, and even violence, to invest in the added security protections that we need in this moment, and to partner with Hillel and other Jewish student organizations in ongoing efforts to eliminate the bias and hostility we're describing. At a governmental level, we appreciate truly the moral clarity and expressions of support from both Congress and the administration for Israel in its just war against Hamas and for Jewish Americans facing growing anti-Semitism. That said, we respectfully request support in the following three areas. Number one, security. We urge you to immediately and substantially expand the nonprofit security grant program. Number two, Title VI enforcement. We urge you to appropriate supplemental funding to the Office of Civil Rights at the Department of Education. We need them to have adequate resources to investigate and pursue Title VI claims. And finally, to support and fund implementation of the national strategy to counter anti-Semitism. Thank you for your consideration.